I'm very happy to have Inspector Michael Loftus, formerly of the BSAP, here with us today. Michael's in the UK. I'm in the Philippines. It's great to have you, Michael. I wonder if you could just get started by telling us a little bit about your background. I don't know if you were born in Rhodesia, but I know you were there from quite early on in the 60s, and you stayed for the duration of the war and left in the 80s, in 1980, I think. But tell us a little bit about how you ended up in the BSAP.
I was born in Ireland in 1946, and all my formative years were of Irish culture, with a
Oh,
thick
wow.
Irish, with a thick Irish accent. And in 1959, and the 23rd of December, we crossed the Irish Sea, my mother, my younger sister, my brother, and myself, and we came to England. And I was educated in Luton at Beachill Boys' School. We lived with my grandmother for a time. She had a huge house in Dunstable Road in Luton, and our school was directly across from us. My brother and I were the first two Irish youngsters to go into that school. Had 1,300 boys, and as you can imagine, with a thick Irish accent, we had a few difficulties in being understood, and a few rumpuses along the way. And then when I left school in 1964, I joined the Bedfordshire Constabulary as a cadet. And I was stationed in a little town in Biggleswade in Bedfordshire initially, and then I was transferred to Dunstable, where I became a senior cadet. The fact that I was made a senior cadet was the fact that I was going to be inaugurated in as a full-time constable at the end of the year. And an old soldier from the Second World War, we were having breakfast one morning, and he said to me, "What are you doing here?" So I said to him, "What do you mean?" So he said, "Get out and about. You should go and see the world. Why don't you go and join the force that you can become a proper policeman and not just walking the beat?" So he gave me a police review, and in there was for Australia, there was for the Hong Kong police, the Rhodesian police, and I applied for all of them. And the quickest one that came back to me was from Don Savage, the recruiting officer in the Strand. He invited me to an interview in September 1965. So I went there, had the interview. I was expecting to write an exam because in those days, to get in, you had to write an exam. He said,
Yeah.
"No, no." He said, "You're ex-policeman." He said, "No, don't worry about it." He said, "All I want you to do is go to Harley Street and they'll see to your teeth and are you healthy?" And a few days later, I got my invite to be at Rhodesia House on the 13th of October 1965.
Wow.
I went there, and unbeknown to me, there was a conglomeration of press there from every press country in the world saying, "Do you know what's happening in Rhodesia? Why are you going there? You know, Rhodesia is a country that's going to have problems. The government there are very dodgy. They're anti-British and whatever." So I wasn't interviewed, but my dear friend Tony Mackay, whom I was standing next to, he said, "I'm going there because my parents are there." So eventually, when we got to Heathrow, there was a guy from the foreign officer checking passports on the way through, and all he's saying to the English guys, "Do you know what you're doing? Do you want to get on this aircraft?" And I came along with my dearly beloved Irish passport. He just looked at me and he said, "I'm not talking to you." So I just walked straight through and got on the aircraft. There was quite a few of us. We were a very big squad. Um, Initially, we were 37. We had ex-policemen from Liverpool, from the Midlands. We had one or two from the Met Police who were much older than me. I was only 18 years old. There was a few guys with me, but myself and a Rhodesian chap, Rob Jobson, we were the two youngest in the squad. He came from Bulawayo, and I was the only Irishman in the squad. So that's my inauguration into the police. The funny part is, on the 15th of October 65, when we had to go to Police General Headquarters in Salisbury, everybody was having an oath of allegiance to the Queen. And I went there, and this superintendent said to me, he said, you know, you have to send an oath of allegiance to the Queen. I said, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm Irish. I don't have that affinity. And he looked at me, he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm Irish. I'm an independent state. Why should I have an affinity with the Queen? So that caused a few rumbles. In the end, I did an affirmation.
Okay.
To Rhodesia.
Yeah.
So
it was only a month before UDI, wasn't it? I mean, so you know that affirmation to the Queen would have fallen away after that.
Well, whatever happened thereafter, it wasn't in my hands. But
yeah.
Funny enough, as we progressed in the training depot, we had a lot of desertions. Some of the Brits decided this wasn't for them, and they up sticks and went to Mozambique, Botswana, and whatever, and the British government repatriated them back to England. And I thought to myself, you know, you've signed a contract, you must honour it. Mm. So I stayed. I enjoyed my depot days. I met a lot of friends. I still have friends from those days. When it was all over, we went to driving school, and from driving school, I was posted to Umtali. And the reason I was posted to Umtali was because I was a sportsman.
Okay.
I was a reasonable soccer or football player, and the OC of Manicaland, Chalky White, was an ardent football player and supporter. So I had a plum station. I was stationed in a township called Chisamba, which was in Sukuva. And I had called Robin Hood and Parker. They were my two senior patrol officers. And I had a boss called Tommy Turnahan, which was a great guy. He was a superb policeman. And I stayed there for a while. Inevitably, I tarnished my image on the odd occasion by going across the border on duty and getting obviously I got hauled up in disciplinary matters and got fined a few £5. Called Keith Lawson, who was the OC in Robbie. He fined me £5 on the first occasion, and on the second occasion he fined me another £5.
Going to, was it Villa Perry? I seem to remember.
No, Machu Panda.
Machu Panda, yes.
Machu Panda. The swimming pool was, I mean, when it was very hot, there was nothing to do on the station. So I took my motorbike and went across the border and got in the pool, had a few chabulis, and then I was grasped on by a chap at the station saying, you know, Loftus is never here. He's always swimming in Samba. So anyway, I was trying.
I have so many memories of us of crossing the border. I mean, in my case, it was at Mount Selinda because I was in Chipinga, so we used to cross over to Espongabera, you know. Yeah. And I remember drinking the Laurentina and 3M beer, and having piri piri prawns and piri piri cashew nuts, you know.
It was fabulous because in those days I used to drink Borges brandy with Coke.
Okay.
Which was a killer. The chaps over there, the Portuguese were very, you know, they were different. I relatively got on with them. Look, I had a few scraps with the Portuguese police over there because they threw me out on the odd occasion from the bar. But that was youth. You know, that was being young and full of nonsense. I was always in trouble initially. And on my third year in the police in Umtali, my chief inspector, Joseph Robert McBride, recommended to the commissioner that I be discharged from the force, unfit for police duties. It came down that a chief superintendent called George Atkinson called me up. He said to me, he said, do you want to stay? So I said, yes, I want to stay. He said, well, you better pull your socks up because recommended that you be discharged from the force. Now, a great friend of mine, Rory Beery, the Beery brothers, had joined the RLI, and he was my best mate. And Rory said to me, "Why don't you come and join the RLI?" He said, "You're only not even 21 yet." He said, "We'll give it a go." So it came back that the force said, "No, we will stick with you." And another friend of mine, Tony Mackay, was getting engaged. Tony was about 7 years older than me, and he was getting engaged to a girl called Shirley Yallop. Shirley was in Founders in Salisbury. So he said, "Why don't you come up for our engagement party?" So I went to the engagement party, and on the Saturday, Tony said to me, "Well, haven't you got a girl that you're going to bring?" I said, "No." I said, "I'll tell you what, Tony, I'll be the bomb." I said, "An Irishman is a bomb, and you're going to have some great." So I started getting the beers in and the cane and the brandy and whatever. And I started drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning because there was nothing else to do. So by the time 6 o'clock came round, when all these guests were arriving at the single quarter, I was well and truly I finished. Anyway, at about 7 o'clock, Tony came through to me. He said, "By the way," he said, "Julie has got you a blind date. And she's standing in the lounge." I said, I was. So a few minutes later, Shirley came and said, "Mike, please come through. This girl is waiting." So I went through, and there was this young lady, blonde, standing at the fireplace, and I went up to her and I said, "Excuse me," in my Irish accent, I think you're my blind date." She said, "Take me home." I said, she said, "Take me home." So we got married 2 years later.
Oh my word.
It just goes to show.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I'm Charlie. I'd been there nearly 3 years, and a notice came out in force orders inviting people to join dog section. Well, I knew they would not transfer me to Salisbury, so I applied and was accepted for dog section. And I went to dog training school. I was there 7 months. And lo and behold, I was transferred to Guelph. And in Guelph, it was very peaceful and very quiet. I had time to train the dog properly. And then I said to the staff officer training, I said, "Listen, I got this girl in Salisbury." I said, "It's costing me a fortune every once a month, travel backwards and forwards from Guelph to Salisbury. Wouldn't you have a bit of understanding and transfer me back?" And a few weeks later, he said yes. He said, "I got the orders." But in between that, for that particular year, when Ian Smith and his wife Janet came down to his farm in Luton, I was subject to go and look after him for the weekend. So old Ruffs and I, in our Land Rover, all the way to Salukwi, picked up a parole officer there, and we lived in his ex-manager's house right next to his farmhouse. And I was told, under no circumstances will you have anything to do with the Prime Minister and his wife whilst they're there. You're there to do the patrols, make sure that everybody is on their toes whilst he's there for the 3 days. So the houseboy came with a note saying you are invited to cover on the Saturday night. So in the back of my mind, I think, Loftus, don't get into trouble. Just write on there, regret, unable to attend. So I sent it with the boss boy, the cook boy, back to Janet Smith. And 15 minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and Russ did a bit of a growl. That was my peace dog, and there she was, Janet Smith. And she said, "Listen, young man," she said, "when the Prime Minister invites you, you do attend. So we expect you." So I said, look, all I've got is socks, t-shirt and shorts." She said, "Perfect for the evening." So 6 o'clock, I ambled up there and went through the kitchen, and he shouted, "The beer is in the fridge." He said, "Bring one for me." So opened 2 beers, went through to him, and he was sitting there and sat down and he chatted. Where are you from? Why are you doing here? And it's nice to see you and whatever. He said, next time we come down, he said, we'll ask for you. He said, because I'm very comfortable talking. That was it. So every time he came down, guess who went? I don't know whether Keith Brown, my other mate in the dog section, was there or not, because if I went to Salisbury to see Barbara, he was left there as the patrol officer on his own with his dog King. So I don't know what happened thereafter, but it was an interesting time. I had a very good friend in CID there called Laurie Ibbott. Laurie and I have been friends ever since those days. Then what happened? I got married. in '69. August '69, I got married to Barbara. I had a police dog guard of honor. Special day for me, because she is still the love of my life. Then the war came along. I was in dog section in 72, 73, and the first call out I had was to Centenary with Butch van Horton, who was the Rhodesian front ranker. Butch and I went to Centenary. We stayed there, ready for call out. We didn't get called out. That was the start of Operation Hurricane. Then we started assessing dogs that could patrol through the bush, and do area searches, and finished with dog section. Went back to uniform branch to actual police work in Salisbury. Was stationed in charge office. I dealt a lot with the young RLI guys that came back into Laboim and let their hair down, and were called out, please, can you remove these chaps? They're causing chaos in Laboim. So there was a few youngsters that were arrested and whatever. The nice part about it is we put them down in the cells, but they were open cells. They weren't, we didn't put it this way, embarrass them by locking them up or whatever. We used to say to them, go and sleep it off. And then one night we get a call. Kun, he was the wrestler, if you remember, Big Jackie Kun.
Okay.
He was the South African heavyweight wrestling champion.
Yes.
He just won the lottery, the Rhodesian lottery of $100,000. He proposed to this young girl, and myself and Ray Dale, who was the police scrum half, we went down there to arrest him. Now, Jackie must have been about 300 pounds, about 263. He was a massive guy. So we asked him nicely, we said, look, we have an inquiry that you've made overtures to the young lady of a sexual nature. Can you please come with it? He said, yes, not a problem. He said, let's sort this out. So anyway, we got a patrol car, went to the charge office, and there was another Irishman called Tom Meakin. He was the duty inspector. Now, Tom wasn't a small lad. He was about 6'2", lovely natured, came from Northern Ireland. And all of a sudden, as we walked out and Jackie Kun sat down, there was one hell of a commotion. And Jackie Kun had Tom lifted him off his feet and was smashing his head on the burglar guard behind him in his office. And Ray Dale and I looked at each other and we thought, no, we got to have a go. So Ray Dale got him around the ankles and I got him around the neck. And we actually pushed him to the ground. And I think there was a big money. And eventually, Ray Dale and I dragged him all the way by his heels down into the cells and put him in there. But to Jackie's disposition, he had bruises all over. And when the doctor went to see him the next morning, He said, no, he said, nothing happened to me. He said, I fell down the stairs. That was one of the incidents I had. The other incident I had, the guy called Sankey, Dave Sankey, he was a bull of a man. Great character, lovely sense of humor, great sense of humor. He was as strong as an ox. And I said to him one day, I said, Dave, aren't you going for promotion? He said, yes. He said, I think I'll go for promotion. So I said, when are you going? He said, I'm going on Friday. He said, I'll be here Friday night for the night shift. I said, fine. So anyway, he comes on the Friday night. And I said to Dave, he said, how did it go? He said, no. He said, it didn't go so well. I said, why? He said, well, he said, I went there and he said, I'm a bit rotund. He and the president of the board said to me, Mr. Sankey, what exercise do you do? He said, well, he said, I have sex 3 times a week. So they looked at him in total astonishment. He said, and I'm told that having sex is equivalent of running a 4-minute mile. So he said, I do 12 minutes miles every week. And he said, it was up to leave. How the character he was. Oh, we had some great characters. These were the old school. You know, these were the guys who'd been in 18, 19 years. Now I was just a rookie of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
They gave me heart that the Rhodesian aspect hadn't come in yet. Because don't forget, the majority of the force, Rhodesia up until 1965, were recruited from outside Rhodesia. I mean, all the recruits came from the UK, either by boat or by. So then it was the start of the big recruiting drive in South Africa and within Rhodesia. That's when the sense of humor changed.
Yeah.
Because let's be quite honest, the Brits had wonderful sense of humor from all parts. The likes of Dennis Marshall, Castell, he was renowned throughout the force. He'd been busted from sergeant to patrol officer on many occasions. And when the commissioner came to do the annual inspection, he said to the commissioner, "You and I have got as far as we got in this force, sir. Have a good day." But yeah, I enjoyed my time. In Salisbury, I joined SWAT. They started SWAT to do counterinsurgency for guys that were coming into the townships. I had one occasion when we were called out to a beer hall in Machu Picchu, and we were told that there was an armed person in the beer hall. Peter Gibson was the team leader. I was number 2. I was the front man going into the beer hall, and they had these huge, big vats that held the old chibuku, and Steve and myself, we were both entrymen. And as I turned the corner, this AK opened up and went past my left head. And Peter Gibson had the presence of mind to get hold of my ankles and pull me. And I fell flat on my face. And this guy who was in there, he even saw a shadow. He opened up. So I had 2 phos grenades. So I chucked 2 phos grenades in there, and it went very, very quiet. And then I thought to myself, no, this guy is either dead or he's playing possum. So I got on the radio and I said, "Can you get an Ndebele speaker to come and say to this person in there, we're not going to harm you. If you come out with your hands above your head, we will not harm you. We will take you into custody and we will treat you." So 5 minutes elapsed, and then all of a sudden, because he came from the dark into the light, and there was myself and Gibson. We looked at him, and he had the biggest Matabele you could ever imagine. He was huge, and he had his AK above his head, and we said to him, put down the AK on the ground. You put it on the ground, and then Gibson and I hit him. Gibson took him around the knees, and I took him around the head. And we lowered him, turned him over, put the cuffs on him, got him outside, and of course, once we got outside to the van, SB came along, and they interrogated him for about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. We were still on standby, and then they had this van with. They put him inside, and they took him around the Harare township, indicating where the rest of the crew was. There were about 7 of them that had come in. They were all Matabele, Coma's lot. And they indicated the house. And of course, what ensued was a bit of a firefight, and we killed a lot. And that was the end of a very long night. What can I say? I was of the opinion that although we were the old school first line of defense, and we were young enough and bold enough to do these type of things, but it really wasn't our role to go and extradite these people from situations. We were policemen. I went there to be a people, crime, security, certainly, but not to fight a war. But eventually, inevitably, the war came along, and you just change roles. I mean, the last police station I was at, Waterfalls, was a proper police station. We had 13 to 1400 criminal dockets every month. Right. Staff. That investigated crime, rape, murder, assaults, housebreakings, and stuff like that. So you did a proper docket and presented it to court. Thereafter, I wasn't a policeman anymore. I was sent to Mukumbura to look after the police reserve that were doing, as you know, they were doing the fence line with private contractors. And there was 1,000 police reserve that used to come in packs and land on the old airstrip. And for 6 weeks to 2 months, I was there looking after these guys, making sure that they didn't get into trouble, that they were strategically placed along the fence line, that if cars came across, they would be repelled. Being called out to various things. Somebody said on Facebook the other day, they wanted to do an emblem for Special Branch. And I nearly called them a lemon. Just put a lemon on your shoulder. Because every time we were called out by Special Branch, it was a lemon. Nothing happened. If we were called out by CID, something happened. So that was my take on that. But otherwise, Joshua and Coma came down in 1980 to have a talk to all the senior officers. Came to the police camp at the Russell in the lounge, and I refused to go. We had a senior ASCOM called Stuart. Everybody would attend. I refused to attend. I refused to attend because he was a killer. He killed all those people in now the Viscounts and whatever, and it turned my stomach that people could survive. They still killed the survivors. It really got up my nose, so I didn't go. Jerry Powell, who was my OC at the time, he called me in. He said, "Didn't see you there." I said, "Mr. Powell, with all due respect," I said, "if I had gone there and I had a gun, I would have shot him." So he said, "Okay, enough." So Jerry and I, we put our tickets in on the same day, the 2nd of May, 1980. He was a chief superintendent and I was an inspector. Yeah. We left the force, and we came down to South Africa, and I joined the SAP.
And then you were also, I understand, or maybe incorrectly, but you were in charge of the police station in Umtali.
I was Umtali Rural.
Tell us a little bit about your time in Umtali.
Well, I went down to Umtali in '78. I was transferred from Neighbourang. I was member in charge Neighbourang when I got a call from Don Keynes, who was staff officer transfers. And Don and I had served in Umtali in '66. He was a very young section officer in those days. And he phoned me. He said, Mike, he said, Alan Rich, who's OC Province, he's asked for you to go to Umtali. So I said, why? He said, he just asked me to probably name out of a hat, but he'd like you to go to Umtali. Can I speak to my wife? And Barbara said, yeah, let's go to Umtali. So I was going back to where I knew all the roads, the places, and so off I went as a single man for the first few months. But I didn't, because John Fletcher, who was the officer in charge in Umtali Rural, he had to do his 3 months exit. So they had me doing strategically placing the polling booths for the election.
Okay.
With Jeremy Strong. Now you know Jerry Strong.
I know Jeremy Strong. Yeah, of course.
He was brigade major at Umtali.
Right.
And Jerry Strong and I, in collusion, set up various posts so that the people from rural district could come in and vote. So, with that, the election over, John Fletcher left and I took over as boss man of Umtali Rural, and we had a reaction team with a police service called Johnny Marcus. With him, there were 6 African, how would you call them, numeraries that we trained for any incident that would happen along in the specifically in the Burma Valley, which was, as you know, was a lovely farming area. They grew tobacco and fruit and whatever. So on the odd occasion, I donned my camo and took my lovely FN, and we would patrol all along the border and inside the border. And there were 2 incidents there with Johnny, that we would come back. We would get the banker over the border, the political commissar, and as you know, he was the banker. And we would roll him and get his Rhodesian dollars, and we would have a party on the weekend. So yeah, we had a few scrapes. Yeah. And of course SB wanted to know where we got these funds when we held the party. So we said it was outside our jurisdiction. Yeah. So yeah, it was good times. Lovely people. Super guys that I worked with.
You weren't in Umtali when they were stonked from Marymount.
Yeah. T-shirt, come to Umtali and get bombed.
Yeah.
In fact, my father was visiting us when they stomped us with the 75 recoilers from the hills.
Yeah.
And one landed just outside our front garden. We had a house that had an underground cellar that was built by a Portuguese builder. So I had my wife, my father, and my 2 young kids. They were locked in there, and I got on in my car and went to the station, make sure that all my African police were in the bunkers and they were well protected. I've still got that 75 recoilless shell on a tripod of AKs, and I've made it into a light. Given it to my grandson, he loves it.
Yeah, because I spent a lot of time in Umtali. My dad was an Anglican priest there, and I went to Carmel College, which is just down the road from Marymount. And some of my memories are I don't know if you ever met Dr. Roy Powell,
No.
but the Powells were very good friends of my parents, and yeah, I've very fond memories. My last year at school, I was at Umtali Boys High with guys like Hannes Wessels and Steve Lunderstead and uh, Tank van der Riet, and yeah. So I was in Palmer House, played first team rugby for Umtali Boys High.
They had
Because
a great.
I remember all the first team rugby players were allowed to wear that white scarf, you know,
Yes,
and
correct.
the girls all used to fancy the boys with white scarves. So that was my motivation for being a good rugby player, was that I could get one of those white scarves. Anyway, so then you left Rhodesia and you went down to South Africa. Apparently, you have some interesting uh, recollections of your time in South Africa.
Oh, indeed, I do. I tried City Street for a bit. Didn't. I applied to join the SAP and was accepted. I went to their counterinsurgency section under a guy called Vic Verster. He was the general in charge. His number two was Brigadier Bert van Drach. The major who controlled the deployment was a guy called Josh Brummer, Major Josh Brummer. So I went there. Peter Houston went there, who was then made, he was a chief superintendent in the force. He was then made half colonel. We were tasked to write a book on national key points and give lectures to people at national key points, which we did. I then went to all the periphery police stations with a half colonel to all their outlying police stations and telling them how to jack up their security and where to put lights. And you know, they were very lax in those days. The SAP thought it would never happen to them. You know, the gates were open in the evening in these outward places, and there was no guards. There, it was so lax. And anyway, I came back and wrote a report. Then they sent me to their training depot up in northern Transvaal, and I spent a few weeks up there where they train people from police stations to come and do their counterinsurgency training, or being deployed up to the Kokolon in Namibia, which was then Southwest Africa. And I wrote a damning report, which was to my detriment. Then they sent me up there. They sent me by DAC Windhoek, and to Windhoek I was deployed to the nether regions up in Southwest Africa to all their bases and whatever. And then when I came back, that was in my 8th month. I bumped into an old friend of mine from police days, Eric Kennelly. Eric Kennelly and I were good mates in the fort. He was a musketry inspector. And he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I'm in the force." So he said, "No, man." He said, "Come with me." So I said, "Eric, he said, "No, just get in the car." So I got in the car and went all the way, went up Old Roberts Heights, is now Fort Sekahokta. And we went to this big, isolated, stone cold building. So I walked all security. I walked through the corridor right along, and everybody was looking at me, SAP uniform. They were all in civvies. So off I went, knocked on the door, I went in, and there was this general, lieutenant general called Look. Yanni looked his head. So he said, in perfect English, he said, "Sit down, young man." So I sat down. He said, "Excuse me." He said, "You know Eric?" I said, "Yes, we were in the police together in Rhodesia." So he said, "Tell me about yourself." So I told him I was Irish and the whole where it had been and counterinsurgency with the SAP and whatever. So he said, "I'd like you to come for an interview." he said, it's just a one-off to see whether you would suit into our force. I said, fine. So on the Friday, went there, walked up to this building in Victoria, and I walked in there, and there was 4 members of the board. 1 head of the Navy, 1 head of the Army, General Lutz, and an aide-de-camp for the General of the Army. He was a major. Sat down, and this guy from the Navy said, Meneer, with a name like Loftus, you've got to be South African. So I said, no, sir. I said, I am Irish. He said, what? Irish? I said, yes, sir. So he said, well, that never rugby field here called Loftus Fast. So I said, I understand. I think it's 2 names. It's either one name or both separate names. Anyway, they gave me the interview, which lasted over an hour. My background, my family, my wife, who was I related to. They took all of this down. And a few weeks later, I get this letter from the recruiting officer of Special Forces. You will be accompanying us at Fort Trekker for 2 days, and thereafter we will see where we're going to appoint you. So they offered me a 6th-year captain in 5 reconnaissance, and subsequently I was transferred to Palabora, where all the ex-Blue Scouts were housed. They'd come from Duka Duka in Natal, and they were transferred all lock, stock, and barrel. Black, white, yellow, green, they were all housed at Palabora. The captain in charge was a guy called Atkinson, who was an ex-major of Scouts. And then all his staff were all ex-officers of the Scouts, and all the operatives were all black and white, were all Scouts.
Sure.
And that's where I fitted in, doing all their op security for the regiment. Then when Atkinson left, he joined the Palabora Mining Company. We got a half colonel called Henny Blau. He came and took over.
Yeah.
That is when we started doing colonels into Mozambique, taking off from Hoedspruit, being dropped in at night in Mozambique and the railway system and whatever. And that was an ongoing saga. Barbara was on her own most of the time because I was away most of the time. And after a few years, she said to me, she said, Mike, she said, our kids are growing up. It's time for us to leave. It's time for you now to think about it. And I was just being promoted to major. And I said, no, go. So that's a few interesting facts about 5 Recce. We had a lot of Angolans in there that didn't speak the language, and they didn't integrate all that well. We had a mixed bag of Tona and Matabele guys. We had all the operatives. And of course, Colonel Ron Reed Daly, when he was in the Transkei, started coming and poaching guys.
Yes.
He started poaching guys. And then we had one guy, it was so funny, one guy from Mad Mike Horslock. You know, they were going to have a go at it. It was at the Seychelles.
Yeah.
And he came to me with a bag full of money. There was at least between 10 and 20,000 rand in the bag. And he said, we would like you to be the security guy for this this op that we're doing with Mr. Hall. And I said, you've got to be joking. I said, there's no way that I am now leaving a very comfortable job for that type of money. So he offered a few guys that type of money, and they all refused. They said no, not at all.
Yeah.
And then we had a guy from Thailand. He was he was training with us at Five Recce, and I got to know him very, very well. He was a very dedicated type of character. 5 o'clock in the morning, I would find him ticking a bag outside the building and doing his Thai thing and whatever. And he said to me, he said, Mike, why don't you come to Thailand? We've got a problem on our border. He said, why don't you come and train us? He said, I will pay you in gold bars. He said, all your family will go to, kids will go to English schools. He said, we will pay for everything. Everything will be free for you. Come for a few years. Come and come to Thailand. Very tempting. Very tempting. I said, no. I said, we've made our home here, and we'll stay. Look, then they started infiltrating guys from other regiments into Five Recce. Chris Moorcroft, who was the senior RSM of the army, he came as our RSM. Billy Snyders came as the half colonel. He came to do operations. All the admin staff all changed. They were all majors, and yeah, they all came with the culture that most of the guys in Salute Scouts didn't understand. You know, the change from being Salute Scouts, being mainly infantry, didn't go down very well. And we started, guys are leaving, ostensibly to go down to join Ron Reed Daly, whom they knew, and that was me in a nutshell. I came down to Pretoria, had an interview with Mobile Oil, a guy called Jameson, who employed me as a trainee executive. And then a few months later, the Sullivan Commission came out from New York saying they couldn't employ white guys. They had to go the route. So, and was very fortunate that I was recruited as a transport manager for a small company. We did transport for a blue chip company in Johannesburg. And I went there, went back to varsity to do transport management. And 2 years later, I was bought out by Imperial Group.
Yes.
And then I was the first manager of that ilk in Imperial, and contract manager. And Bill Lynch, who was then chairman of the group, came along and said, "You're doing a fine job here for this company that we bought out. I'd like you to stay on." So he said, as we grow, he said, Mike, you will grow. And he was an Irishman. He came from Kerry. So I said, well, from one Irishman to another, let's see if we can get along. So he said, fine. And within 2 years, I was a director. Sure. And then I became coastal director, and then I ended up national operations director for Imperial. Sure. And then at 55, in 17 years with the company, and I decided the pressure was getting to me. I was never at home. You know, I was always traveling, putting out fires all over the place. When I was transferred to Salisbury, to Johannesburg head office, it was a different culture altogether. Couldn't think for yourself. Everybody tried to think for you. I'm not like that. I've always been my own man. I've always gone my own way. This wasn't for me. Again, regretted to say, it was the Afrikaans culture that came into the group that drove me. And believe it or not, people don't believe me when I say that they have a culture all of their own. They look after themselves, they promote themselves, and if you're English speaking, you have no.
Yeah.
And of course, I was top of the tree, so I was counteracting that by employing English speaking guys. So there was a clash.
Yeah.
The new boss came in, who was very, very Afrikaans. He and I had a bit of a, and I resigned and went to Cape Town, 1980, 2000. My brother, who was here in England, had leukemia. And he said, come on. He said, come over here. He said, I've got a business going. He said, we can go down memory lane. So Barbara and I packed up, came over, a few suitcases, came to see my brother. And we went to Ireland and we went down memory lane, where we went to school, where my mum was born and brought up, where my dad went to school in the west of Ireland. Went to Dublin. Oh, we went all around. We had a marvelous time. And then he said, right, he said, at the end of the journey, he said, let's go to Paris. So we were off to Paris. We took the train into Paris. His wife was French, so she spoke fluent Froggy, and she knew Paris like the back of her hand. And we went everywhere. We went on the underground. We saw the Eiffel Tower. We saw every single thing. We spent a few weeks there, and then came back. And then we got the dreaded phone call from my daughter. I'm pregnant. Come and help me. So we packed up, and she was 38 or 39 at the time. So we said, well, okay, we'll come and stay with you. Went, little girl, called Simone, and we stayed there for a few months. And Barbara said to me, she said, I miss the freedom of England. So she was born in South Africa. She spent her formative years in Kenya. Her father was a farmer. By the way, her father was a RSM of the South African Air Force in the Middle East during the war. He got married to an English girl, and married in Alexander during the war in 1940 something. He was a very strict, brought up in a very strict, from Beaufort West. His parents were very strict. His father was also in the army, so they were characters. And when I met him, he was a very, very strict guy, all through his life. There was no black and grey area with this man. He was straight down the middle, and I got on exceptionally well with him. The mother, she came born in Liverpool, brought up in Manchester, and she had my sense of humour. Like we had great laughter in the house when we came to visit them. And basically, a few years ago, 5 years ago, in fact, when things got a bit hairy in Cape Town, when bullets were flying all over the place, Brendan did a face-to-face with me, and he said, Dad, he said, sell it. He said, just get out of it. Come and spend your days here. So we contemplated it, and then eventually we decided to sell up and come across. And we've been exceptionally happy since.
Yeah.
We that there's nothing better than having a son that's got your sense of humor.
Yeah.
You know.
Michael, we've run out of time, unfortunately. But that's great. It's lovely to hear your story. Really appreciate you giving us your history of your Rhodesian and South African experience. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And I hope whoever listens to it, it brings back fond memories.
Okay.
Thank you.